It was the 9th year of Jingguan, the spring of 635 AD. I was lying on a long stone bench in a pavilion within the imperial palace, eyes closed, letting my mind wander. Two people stood nearby. One was a female official in her early 20s, refined and elegant. The other was a young eunuch about 10 years old with thick eyebrows and big eyes, a cheerful-looking kid. The woman looked up at the sky and stepped forward, her voice a soft whisper. She called me Prince Shin and told me it was time for dinner. I was Li Shun, the 10th son of Emperor Taizong, Li Shimin. I was 7 years old. My mother was noble consort Wei, the head of the 4 highest-ranking consorts in the palace and a noblewoman from a powerful family. "Oh, all right," I muttered. I stood up slowly, every movement dripping with laziness. Nobody knew that beneath the skin of this 7-year-old child lived a soul from over 1,400 years in the future. A year ago, I was a middle-aged man born in the 80s. I was in my 30s, running a small, unremarkable shop. I worked from dawn till dusk, grinding away at life, spending 10 hours a day behind a counter scrolling through videos and reading web novels. I was just a shut-in with a business license. I thought I'd live out my life in total obscurity until a freak electrical accident sent me to the afterlife. I never expected to wake up in the Tang dynasty as a prince. Being a royal sounds great, but the reality was depressing. I was stuck in the body of a 6-year-old. It was awkward and honestly a bit tragic for a 30-year-old man to be trapped in a toddler's life. I'd spent the last year trying to adapt. I vaguely remembered a video I'd seen back in my old life saying that Li Shun would be sent away to his own fiefdom at the age of 8. I walked out of the pavilion toward the side hall of the dodgy palace. This was where my mother, noble consort Wei, lived. Her status was second only to Empress Zhang's son. In the early Tang dynasty, underage princes and princesses lived with their mothers in the inner palace. Only those whose mothers had passed away were raised by the empress. Everyone else stayed put until they reached adulthood, at which point they either moved to their fiefdoms or stayed in Chang'an. As I entered, I saw a beautiful woman in regal attire sitting on a raised platform. This was noble consort Wei. Even at 37, she was stunning and carried herself with immense grace. It made sense why Li Shimin had married her despite her being 2 years older than him and a widow. I caught myself thinking about how attractive she was and immediately shook it off. She was my mother now. I couldn't think like that. "Shinner, come and eat," she said softly. "Yes, mother," I replied. I walked over and sat cross-legged on the platform. According to palace etiquette, all of the emperor's children were supposed to call Empress Zhang's son mother and their birth mothers auntie. I hated that, so I called her mother consort in private. It wasn't a real term in the Tang dynasty, so in public, I stuck to the rules and called her auntie. But what I hated most was the lack of chairs. We had to sit on mats. Eating felt like being back in kindergarten with those tiny tables. Sitting on my heels for a long time was incredibly uncomfortable. The Imperial Academy even had 4 different sitting styles based on how you folded your legs, claiming it was about refinement and character. To me, it was just 4 different ways to make your legs go numb. I went along with it anyway. It was better than getting lectured. "Shinner, have you finished your studies at the academy?" she asked. This was her daily question. She cared deeply about my education. "I've finished, mother." "You must study hard," she continued. "When you leave for your fiefdom in the future, you need to be capable. As a prince, you should share the emperor's burdens. You're 7 now. Use these next few years to learn and stay out of trouble." "Yes, mother. I'll remember," I said respectfully. Deep down, I knew she didn't realize that in just 1 year, I'd be gone. Thinking about it made me a little sad. She had truly doted on me this past year. Even though I wasn't her original son, blood is thicker than water, and I'd grown fond of her. Once a prince left for his fiefdom, he couldn't return to the capital without an imperial decree. Who knew when we'd see each other again? The inner palace was like a golden cage designed to serve just one man, the emperor. Many women lived here for years without ever seeing his face. My mother had given him a son, which gave her status, but the emperor didn't visit more than once a month. His heart belonged to Empress Zhang's son. Once I left, she would be incredibly lonely. I couldn't change that. Unless the emperor died, she was stuck here, and Li Shimin still had over a decade of life left in him. "Tomorrow is a day off," she said suddenly. The emperor sent word that we are going boating on the South Sea Pond. We'll have lunch at the Wanyan Pavilion. Who else is going? I asked. I knew it wasn't just us. Li Shimin was a hard-working ruler. He didn't have the leisure time to just go boating with one consort and a kid. I asked the eunuch. Everyone from the rank of Jiyu and above is going, along with the other princes and princesses. The empress arranged it because the emperor has been exhausted lately. She wants him to relax. You'll come with me tomorrow. I understand. I'll go with you, mother. I've finished eating, so I'll head back to my quarters now. I put down my chopsticks and bowed. Go ahead, she said, watching me leave. I could tell she didn't know what to say to me. To her, I didn't act like a child. I lacked the energy and playfulness of my siblings. Even the stable princes were clearly just putting on an act, but I was different. She probably thought there was something wrong with me. My sister, Li Mengjiang, was always chatting and telling her stories, but I was quiet. I walked straight back to my small courtyard. I had 1 year left. My past life of constant struggle was still fresh in my mind. In this life, I had the ultimate shortcut. I was a prince. I wasn't going to waste it trying to become emperor or changing the world. I was going to enjoy every bit of wealth and luxury this life offered. To hell with hard work. I just wanted to be a happy, spoiled royal. I didn't go to sleep immediately after returning to my quarters. In this era, there was absolutely no entertainment. No phones, no internet, nothing. Most people just went to bed as soon as the sun went down. Even after a year of living here, I still wasn't used to it. I called for my maids to help me wash up and change. Even as an ignored prince, I still had people to wait on me. I had 3 maids. The oldest was Lan Yuer. She was 20 and had been sent by my mother's family. She wasn't just a servant, she was there to watch over me. The inner palace was a bloody battlefield. People did insane things for the throne, and plenty of princes didn't live long enough to see the sun. Then there were Dong Mei and Chun Xiang. They were both around 10 years old. Girls in this era grew up fast. With a bit of training, they were perfectly capable of taking care of a 7-year-old. Finally, there was Shirtu. He was my 10-year-old attendant and an orphan. He was my study partner, but really, he was just there to keep me company. In the palace, princes and princesses rarely interacted unless they shared the same mother. It was a lonely life. Shirtu, light another candle and bring it over, I said. It's too dark. Yes, Your Highness, he replied, scurrying to the desk. I sat down, and Dong Mei began grinding the ink for me. I picked up the brush and fell into thought. Lately, I had been obsessing over my future. Should I stay in Chang'an or go to a distant fiefdom? If I wanted the life of luxury I dreamed of, I needed money. Wealth was the only pillar that could support a good life. My royal allowance was barely enough for a comfortable middle-class existence. To get rich, staying in Chang'an was my best bet. It was the heart of everything, like a modern megacity. I had the knowledge of the future. I didn't want to be a virtuous prince in the traditional, boring sense. To me, virtue meant 2 things: financial freedom and the power to do whatever I wanted. So, I had 2 goals. 1, make money. 2, stay in Li Shimin's good graces so I could stay in the capital. Whenever I had free time, I wrote down everything I remembered from my past life. I recorded manufacturing methods for daily items I'd seen on apps like TikTok. I drew diagrams for simple tools. I wasn't trying to build an atomic bomb. I couldn't even if I wanted to. I focused on simple, practical things that could be made with enough labor and materials. Your Highness, what are you drawing today? Shirtu asked, leaning in curiously. I looked at him and smiled. Treasures, Shirtu. By the way, what do you want most in the world? I just want to never be hungry, he said without hesitation. I want a full belly every day. He was an orphan. He had become a eunuch just to survive. I turned to Dong Mei. What about you? She thought for a moment. I just want you to be healthy, Your Highness. I want to serve you forever. You're a sweet girl, I laughed. I haven't spoiled you for nothing. She was right, though. Health was everything. As I stood up to stretch, my legs felt numb. I hated kneeling. Since I started attending the National Academy, I had to kneel all day. It was torture. I was still a growing boy. If I kept this up, I'd end up bow-legged. I walked to my bookshelf and pulled a locked iron box from a hidden compartment. I opened it to reveal a thick stack of papers covered in drawings and notes. I flipped through them until I found a specific sketch. Dong Mei was right. I needed to grow up healthy. I couldn't let tradition ruin my body. The sketch wasn't anything high-tech. It was just a chair and a desk. In this era, everyone sat on the floor. I had drawn a massive, modern executive desk, 3 meters long and over a meter wide. I wanted it made of high-end wood, something grand and imposing. But for now, I just needed something functional for my room. My shelves were packed with books on history, medicine, and philosophy. My mother had them smuggled in from her family, so I'd have an excuse for inventing things later. I could just say I read about it in an old book. I quickly sketched a simpler set of furniture. I looked at the designs and nodded. I needed these made as soon as possible. I called out. Do you know where they do woodwork in the palace? The CG office, Your Highness, she answered immediately. They handle all the furniture for the inner palace. Perfect. I'll go there tomorrow. It's late, Your Highness, reminded me gently. You should rest. The consort said you're going to the pond tomorrow. It wouldn't be good if you overslept. I sighed and put my papers away. She was right. I had a long day of relaxing with the royal family ahead of me. Lan Yuer took her duties seriously. She made sure to remind me of every important detail, leaving me no room to argue. I sighed. There was no entertainment in this era, and once the sun went down, there was nothing left to do but sleep. I climbed into bed and started counting sheep, waiting for sleep to take me. Lan Yuer and the other maids filtered out of the room, but Dong Mei stayed behind. According to palace rules, someone had to stay until the candles were blown out and the noble was tucked in. Tonight was her shift to watch over me. In the silence of the room, I lay there staring at the ceiling, wondering what the next day would bring. The next morning, Dong Mei woke me early. She helped me wash and dress before leading me to the side hall for breakfast. As I walked in, I heard voices. My mother, Consort Wei, was sitting there laughing and chatting with a young girl. The girl turned around when she heard my footsteps. She was elegant, with her hair styled in delicate loops and wearing a shimmering crescent moon skirt. Her light makeup highlighted features that looked remarkably like my mother's. Greetings, mother. Greetings, sister, I said, stepping forward to bow. This was my older sister, Li Mengjiang. Shaner, you're here, my mother said, gesturing for me to sit. Eat quickly. Mengjiang is coming with us to the South Sea Pond today. I was a bit surprised. Sister is coming too? Li Mengjiang usually hated these formal gatherings. She preferred hanging out with her friends from other noble families. She wasn't exactly wild, but at 11 or 12 years old, she had a lively spirit. Of course, in front of outsiders, she was always the picture of a well-bred lady. It's a day off, Mengjiang said, nodding. Mother said it's best to go. The Empress organized this event herself. If I don't show up, people will start whispering. My mother nodded in agreement. She's right, Shaner. This palace is full of gossips and busybodies. Everyone is looking for a way to climb higher, and there are plenty of people eyeing my position. We have to be cautious. I understand, I replied. Even though I hadn't faced any real schemes in the year I'd been here, I'd watched enough TV and read enough novels to know how the palace worked. It was a battlefield. My mother was the head of the 4 consorts, second only to Empress Zhang's son. Without her powerful family background and her own wits, she never would have held on to that spot for so long. After breakfast, we gathered our attendants and headed toward the South Sea Pond. The Taiji Palace had 3 major ponds, and the South Sea was the one near the Xianqi Hall. It was a massive, beautiful area fed by the city's canal system. By the time we arrived, many concubines, princes, and princesses were already there. In the Tang dynasty, even showing up to a party had a strict order. Minor concubines arrived early to show respect. My mother was high-ranking, so we arrived in the second wave. The emperor and empress, of course, would arrive last. Mengjiang, Shaner, go play, my mother said, heading toward the cloud-watching pavilion. I'm going to sit with the others. On occasions like this, the adults stuck together while the kids were expected to mingle. Let's go over there, Mengjiang told me. And remember to greet everyone properly. Don't let people say we lack manners. I know, sister, I promised. I wasn't a real kid. I knew how to play the game. As we walked along the edge of the pond, I felt like a broken record. Greetings, 8th sister. Greetings, 9th sister. Greetings, 7th brother. The list went on and on. I realized just how many kids my father, Li Shimin, actually had. And this wasn't even all of them. Well, if it isn't the bookworm. Why aren't you reading today? A sarcastic voice came from behind me. I turned to see a teenager in a tight-sleeved hunting outfit, a jade pendant swinging at his waist. Greetings, sixth brother, I said, bowing. This was Li Yin, the sixth prince. He was the son of consort Yang and the grandson of the former emperor of the Sui dynasty. Rumor said he was hot-headed and arrogant, but to me, he just seemed like a typical spoiled rich kid who liked hunting and partying. I thought you wouldn't show up, Li Yin sneered. Whenever we ask you to go out and play, you're always too busy with your studies. What changed? Sixth brother, this is the Empress's event, I shot back with a small smile. It's by imperial decree. Would you dare stay away? I think the bookworm has a point, another voice chimed in. Li Yin turned. It was the eighth prince, Li Jun. History remembered him as a talented man, skilled in both archery and literature. Greetings, sixth brother, Li Jun said, stepping up. I heard you went hunting again recently. Did you get into trouble? Don't talk nonsense, Li Yin snapped. What trouble could I possibly get into? I heard the censors are filing complaints against you again, Li Jun said calmly. They say your servants were violent and trampled over a farmer's crops. Sixth brother, if you ruined his field, just pay the man. Why let it escalate? Father is going to scold you again. That peasant tried to extort me for a whole string of coins, Li Yin grumbled. He said if I didn't pay, he'd report it to the authorities. I had to show him some royal dignity, so he'd learn his place. I frowned. He dared to try and scam you to your face? Well, no, Li Yin admitted, looking a bit defensive. That's what my servant told me. I'm a prince. I don't handle negotiations with peasants myself. Li Jun shook his head. Sixth brother, you should go back and check on that servant of yours. There's something wrong there. What do you mean? Li Yin asked, confused. He's lying to you, Li Jun explained. He's probably using your name to do bad things and pocketing the money. Impossible, Li Yin argued. He's been with me for years. He's loyal. I decided to jump in. Sixth brother, think about it. You're a prince. Does a common farmer really have the guts to scam the sixth prince of the Great Tang? He'd be asking for a death sentence. Either someone is putting him up to it to frame you, or your servant is lying to you. I'd bet on the servant. Li Yin went quiet. He was arrogant and hot-tempered, but he wasn't stupid. He just hadn't bothered to think about it until now. Li Yin stayed silent for a long time. He had trusted his men blindly, but hearing Li Jun and me break it down made his expression shift. He wasn't stupid. He started to see the holes in the story. I was right, he was a prince. Why would a lowly commoner risk a death sentence to scam royalty? Killing a peasant wasn't a major crime for a prince. It was a fine and a scolding at most. Fine, Li Yin grumbled, his jaw tightening. I'll go back and look into it. If that dog of a servant is using me as a shield, I'll show him what happens to liars. He turned to leave, but a high-pitched voice cut through the air. The emperor arrives. A group of people approached from the distance. Leading them was Li Shimin, draped in a bright yellow dragon robe. Beside him walked Empress Zhang's son, looking elegant and dignified, and the crown prince, Li Chengqian, in pale yellow robes. Behind them followed Li Tai, the prince of Wei, and Li Ji, the prince of Jin. Li Ji was carrying a small girl in his arms. I guessed she was Princess Jin Yang, Li Mingda. I'd heard she was brilliant and kind-hearted, though she was destined to die young from what I remembered, possibly asthma. Greetings, Your Majesty. Greetings, Empress. We all stepped forward to bow. I stayed in the back, leaning into a deep bow. Thankfully, the Tang dynasty didn't require the constant kneeling and kowtowing of later dynasties. That was reserved for only the most formal occasions. Rise, Li Shimin said, waving a hand. There are no outsiders today. No need for such formality. The Empress saw I was tired and wanted me to rest. Don't be constrained. We'll have a family banquet at Wanyan Hall at noon. He led Empress Zhang's son toward the South Sea Lake, and the various concubines followed like a colorful tail. They were all eager to catch his eye, hoping for a visit to their chambers tonight. The princes and princesses stayed back. Li Shimin and the Empress boarded a large pleasure boat with their personal eunuchs and guards. Li Tai, Li Ji, and little Jinyang went with them. The crown prince and his wife, Lady Su, took a separate boat. They had just married earlier this year, and the emperor was quite fond of her. The other concubines split up into smaller boats or stayed on the shore to admire the view. My mother, Consort Wei, boarded a boat with Consort Yang and Consort Yin, heading toward the center of the lake. I wasn't interested in the water. I found a secluded pavilion far from the crowd and sat down. I signaled a nearby eunuch to bring some snacks. In the palace, rules were everything. Only the top-tier royals could bring their own servants. The rest of us had to use the palace staff assigned by the empress to ensure security. The eunuch returned with a plate of pastries. It was May, so there wasn't much fruit available, and even if there was, I wouldn't get any. Even though my mother was technically the head of the 4 senior consorts, I could tell she wasn't the favorite. Our treatment reflected that. My sister, Li Mingjiang, didn't even have an official title yet, and I had been sent to my fiefdom when I was only 8. I looked at my mother's boat in the distance. In my past life, there was a lot of debate about Consort Wei's height. Some said archaeologists got it wrong, but having seen her, I believed them. She was nearly 6'3". I used to wonder if Li Shimin's interest in her was less about love and more about a desire to conquer a literal giantess. He was barely 5'10" himself. I took a bite of a pastry and nearly choked. It was terrible. These things looked beautiful, but felt like eating dry sawdust. I stared at the half-eaten cake, wondering if I should just start cooking my own food. I'd spent 30 years in the modern world. Surely I could recreate something better than this after watching a few thousand cooking videos. Brother, what are you thinking about? Li Mingjiang's voice snapped me out of it. She walked into the pavilion with another young girl. Greetings, sixth sister, I said, standing up quickly. The girl was Li Anren, the princess of Yuzhong. Her birth mother had died during labor, so she had been raised by Empress Zhang's son. The emperor treated her with special affection because of that. Brother, why are you sitting here alone instead of playing? She asked softly. I'm just thinking about my schoolwork, sister, I replied seriously. She laughed. I was only 7, so my serious face probably looked ridiculous. I heard you're very studious at the academy, she said, her tone turning gentle. But you shouldn't isolate yourself. Making friends with the sons of the nobility is important. They will be the officials of the future. It will help you when you eventually leave for your fiefdom. I looked at her, surprised. It wasn't that I didn't think she was smart. Kids in the palace grew up fast, but it was rare for siblings to give such genuine advice. Life in the palace was cold. Even though we all had to call the empress mother and our biological mother's aunt, we weren't exactly a big, happy family. I kept my mother's true title for private moments. Out here, the walls had ears. My mother, Consort Wei, originally hated the idea of me calling her mom. She was terrified of breaking palace etiquette and causing trouble. But as a man educated in the modern world, I simply couldn't bring myself to call my own mother auntie. It felt wrong. Li Anren noticed my stunned expression and quickly explained herself. Sister Mingjiang and I are close, she said with a smile. She told me that all you do is study at the academy and read books when you get home. She's worried you're turning into a boring bookworm. I let out a breath, finally understanding. I wasn't that close to the princess of Yuzhong yet, so her sudden concern had felt out of place. Suddenly, a series of frantic screams shattered the peace of the garden. Someone fell in the water. Help! It's Consort Yin. Save her. I looked toward the South Sea pond. About 30 meters from the shore, a figure was thrashing wildly in the water. It was clear she couldn't swim. A pleasure boat nearby was trying to turn around, but even in the modern world, a boat doesn't just stop on a dime. In this era, relying on manual oarsmen who weren't even professionals, it was an agonizingly slow process. By the time the boat reached her, the figure had stopped struggling. She was sinking. Several eunuchs who could swim finally dove in, and after 2 or 3 grueling minutes, they managed to pull her onto the boat. When they reached the shore, they carried her limp body onto the grass. My father, Emperor Li Shimin, had already arrived, his face grim. An imperial physician in his 60s, old man Su, rushed forward. He had them flip her over to drain the water, then checked her pulse and breathing. He even peeled back her eyelids. I stood at the back of the crowd, peering through the gaps. The woman on the ground was Consort Yin, the birth mother of my brother, Li Jun. Physician Su, how is she? My father asked, stepping forward. Your Majesty. The old man trembled. Consort Yin was in the water too long. The water has entered her lungs. There is no pulse, no breath. Her lips are turning purple. I believe, I believe. He trailed off, terrified. In the Tang dynasty, they had methods for drowning, like hanging someone upside down or burying them in ash, but those only worked if there was a flicker of life left. Without a pulse or breath, she was legally dead. If word got out that a high-ranking consort drowned while the emperor was out enjoying himself, the ministers, especially that old nag Wei Zheng, would never let him hear the end of it. Is there really no other way? My father asked. He knew what the silence meant, but he couldn't accept it. His reputation was at stake. Your Majesty, I am powerless, the physician whispered. I fear she is gone. Mother, 8-year-old Li Zhen couldn't hold back anymore. He threw himself onto his mother's body, wailing in grief. The crowd looked on with expressions of pity, some real, some faked. I watched the scene unfold. My mind was racing. I knew that she had only been submerged for less than 10 minutes. In the modern world, that's within the golden window for resuscitation. If I acted now, there was a chance. This was my moment. I needed Li Shimin to notice me. I needed to prove my worth. I think she can still be saved, I shouted. The wailing stopped. Every head turned toward me. In the palace, we usually called our father Yi, or father, not the formal imperial father you see in movies. I stepped forward, feeling the weight of 100 eyes. Shinner, don't talk nonsense, my mother, Consort Wei hissed. She was pale, terrified I would offend the emperor. Your father is here, keep your mouth shut. Li Shimin looked at me. I was the son he rarely noticed, the one who stayed buried in books. Father, if we want to save her, we have to move now, I said, ignoring my mother's warning glare. Otherwise, it really will be too late. Physician Su said she is gone, my father said, his voice flat. How do you plan to save her? Regardless of the outcome, shouldn't we at least try everything possible? I looked him straight in the eye. He hesitated. He realized that even if it failed, at least it would look like he tried his best to save her. He nodded. Fine. Try it. Father, I can't do it. You have to be the one to perform the treatment, I said. His face darkened instantly. He wasn't a doctor. Did I want him to make a fool of himself? Or was I suggesting he fake a rescue? I will teach you the method, I explained quickly, sensing his anger. There's no time to explain why, we just have to try. I didn't wait for his permission. I started gesturing and explaining the basics of CPR and mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. It sounded simple, but the technique was specific. If you pressed too hard, you'd snap a rib and puncture a lung. My father listened, his expression shifting from confusion to realization. When I mentioned pressing down on the chest, he understood why I couldn't do it. In this palace, every woman belonged to him. No other man, not even a son or a doctor, was allowed to touch them there. Father, hurry. It's now or never, I urged. My father was a man of action, a soldier who had won a throne on horseback. He didn't care if the method sounded strange. He saw the logic in the optics. If he personally saved her, the critics would be silenced. He knelt down and placed his hands on Consort Yan's chest, exactly where I showed him. Not too hard, father, I whispered, crouching beside him. You'll break her bones. I know, he grunted. 1, 2, 3. I counted the compressions. 13, 14, 15. Now, father. Tilt her chin up. Pinch her nose. Take a deep breath and blow. I focused on guiding my father, but I didn't notice his face was turning a deep shade of red. Around us, the concubines were blushing too. In this era, performing such intimate movements in front of a crowd was unheard of. Even a battle-hardened man like Li Shimin felt the awkwardness of the situation. Still, he didn't stop. 1, 2, 3, 4. We hit the count of 15 again. Breathe, I commanded. He leaned down. I watched the clock in my head. Faster, father. Keep the rhythm. We kept at it for 3 or 4 minutes. There was no sign of life. A few mouthfuls of water spilled from her lips, but her chest remained still. My father was starting to tire, his breath coming in heavy heaves. Li Shun, he gasped, never stopping the compressions. Is this method of yours actually going to work? It should, father, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. I read about it in an ancient book. It said this is the only way for drowning victims. In truth, my heart was sinking. It had been so long. There wasn't even a twitch. My father didn't reply. He just gritted his teeth and kept going. Another 5 or 6 minutes passed. Suddenly, Consort Yin's body jerked. She coughed twice, hacking up a spray of water. Then, her mouth flew open, and she began to gasp for air with a ragged, desperate sound. "She's awake," someone screamed. "She's actually alive." The crowd erupted. The shock was palpable. She had been dead, breathless for nearly 15 minutes, and now she was breathing. To them, this wasn't medicine. It was a miracle. "Father, stop. Don't press anymore," I shouted. I didn't care about the gossip. I just didn't want him to accidentally crush her ribs now that her heart was beating on its own. He stopped instantly, looking down at her with wide, stunned eyes. Then he looked at his own hands. He hadn't believed me. I knew that. He had only agreed to do it because it looked better for his reputation if he was the one trying to save her. But now, it had actually worked. I could see the gears turning in his head. If word of this reached the commoners, that the imperial physician gave up, but the emperor's love was so strong he brought her back from the dead, his prestige would hit the ceiling. For years, he had worked tirelessly to wash away the blood from the Xuanwu Gate incident where he took the throne. This miracle could be spun into a story of divine right. Dragon breath, heavenly protection, the propaganda possibilities were endless. "Father, now that she's awake, it's best to let the physicians take over," I whispered, breaking his trance. "She's weak and the water was freezing. They are better at the follow-up care." "Right? Yes. Physician Su," my father called out. "Get over here and check her." Old man Su stumbled forward, still looking like he'd seen a ghost. He reached for her pulse, his hands shaking. He had studied medicine for 50 years, read every scroll he could find, and kept crates of notes. Nothing in his experience explained how pressing a chest and blowing air could bring back the dead. After a moment, he bowed low to my father. "Congratulations, Your Majesty. Consort Yin has returned to us. Her pulse is weak and the cold has settled in her bones. She must be moved to her quarters immediately to change her clothes and rest. If she stays in these wet silks, the chills will take her." "Do it," my father ordered. "Take her back to her palace. Serve her well." The maids and eunuchs scrambled to obey, lifting the shivering woman and rushing her away. With the crisis over, I expected my father to head back to his chambers. Instead, he seemed energized. "Inform the Bureau of Imperial Food," he announced. "We will dine at the cloud-watching pavilion." His head eunuch, Wang De, hurried off to make the arrangements. I followed the procession, watching the security detail. Even on a casual outing, the emperor was surrounded. Guards were posted every few hundred meters, and dozens of men stayed within 100 paces, their hands never leaving their sword hilt. We reached the pavilion, which was more like a long, grand corridor ending in a massive gazebo. The seating was strictly dictated by rank. My father and Empress Zhangsun sat at the head table. The crown prince, Li Chengxian, and his wife sat to the left. To the right were the high-ranking concubines. I found a spot on a mat next to my sister, Li Mengjiang. The other princesses gave me strange looks. As a prince, I was supposed to sit with the boys further up the line, regardless of how overlooked I usually was. But I didn't care about the seating chart. Servants brought out stone boxes to keep the food warm. In the Tang dynasty, tea wasn't just leaves and water. It was a thick soup boiled with onions, ginger, garlic, and salt. I watched as my father took the first bite. Only then did everyone else pick up their chopsticks. The food was the best the era had to offer, but to my modern palate, it was just okay. Everything was steamed, boiled, or roasted with very few spices. Spices were like currency back then, literal gold. I was slowly picking at a piece of fish when my father cleared his throat. The entire pavilion went silent. Chopsticks were dropped. Everyone sat up straight. The emperor was ready to speak. The lake cruise had been a success, and my father, Li Shimin, was in high spirits. He cleared his throat, his voice booming across the pavilion. He told everyone how happy he was that Consort Yin had returned from the dead. Then, he mentioned me. He credited the miracle to my strange rescue method and called for me to step forward. He looked toward the section where the princes sat, but I wasn't there. He frowned, glancing at his head eunuch, Wang De. The old eunuch looked just as confused. This wasn't the kind of event a prince should miss. "Father, I'm over here. Over here." I hadn't expected him to mention me at all. After Consort Yin was carried back to her palace, he hadn't said a word of praise. I figured he wanted to forget the whole embarrassing ordeal. I was an unfavored prince, so I had just tucked myself away. Now, I was the one feeling embarrassed. Because I was small for my age, nobody could see me. I had to jump up and wave my arms like a frantic kid. My father followed the sound of my voice. His eyes widened when he realized I was sitting in the very back of the princess section, right next to the lower-ranking concubines. I kept waving, looking desperate to be noticed. It was a ridiculous sight for a royal prince. Suddenly, my father burst out laughing. It was a genuine, hearty laugh, the kind Wang De and Empress Zhang's son hadn't heard in years. "Li Shun, what on earth are you doing back there?" he shouted, still chuckling. "Come forward and speak." I hurried to the front of the pavilion. My father looked me up and down. He told me that saving Consort Yin was a great service and asked what reward I wanted. I knew this was a test. I bowed low, keeping my face serious. I told him that the credit wasn't mine. I said it was all thanks to his dragon chi and the protection of the Tang ancestors. I went all in on the flattery. I told him he was the true son of heaven, a man whose presence alone could drive away evil spirits and demons. I spoke about our clan's destiny to crush barbarians and unite the world for 1,000 generations. I was laying it on so thick I almost felt like a cult leader. When I finished, the entire pavilion was silent. I peeked up. Everyone was staring at me. I worried I'd overdone it. The concubines looked stunned. They probably thought my mother had coached me. The other princes looked jealous. I was usually the quiet one who never played with them. But my father? He looked electrified. In this era, many noble families still looked down on the Li family as usurpers. My words hit him right in the heart. He loved it. "Good. Well said," he roared. "This world belongs to the Li family. To drive the barbarians and ride across the lands. That is the spirit a prince should have. Guard, bring the Prince of Shun some wine." The atmosphere shifted instantly. Hearing him call me Prince of Shun so warmly meant I was finally in his sights. Wang De brought me a cup of cloudy, sweet rice wine. My father raised his own cup. "Come, Li Shun, drink with your father." The court gasped. Drinking one-on-one with the emperor was a massive honor. I finished the cup in one gulp. It was weak, barely stronger than beer, but the gesture meant everything. He rewarded me with 50,000 strings of cash, fine silk, and 3 sets of royal robes. My mother, Consort Wei, stood up and bowed, her eyes shining with relief and pride. After the banquet, the emperor went back to work, and I returned to the Daji Palace with my mother. Once we were inside, her face turned serious. She grabbed my shoulders and asked where I had learned that rescue method. She warned me that if it had failed, the consequences would have been deadly. "I just couldn't watch her die, Mother," I said softly. She sighed, her voice filled with a mother's sadness. She told me the palace was a nest of vipers where everyone fought for scrap of power. She had spent her life being cautious just to keep me safe. She knew she would never leave these walls, but she wanted a better life for me. I tried to comfort her. I told her that once I went to my fiefdom and became successful, I would take care of her. But deep down, I felt the sting of it. In this world, leaving for a fiefdom meant I might not see her again for decades. "Be careful, Shinner," she whispered. "The world outside isn't peaceful either. Your father is facing opposition, and I hear your brother, the Prince of Wei, is getting ambitious. Stay away from the struggle for the throne. It always ends in blood." I nodded, promising to stay out of trouble. But I had big plans of my own. I excused myself and headed straight for the palace workshops with my servants, Lan Yuer and Little Stone. Yesterday, I had drawn up designs for something the Tang dynasty had never seen, proper chairs and tables. I found the head eunuch of the workshop and handed over my sketches. The craftsmen gathered around, scratching their heads as they looked at the strange drawings. It was time to bring a little modern comfort to the 7th century. The head eunuch of the workshop, a man named Zhang Wang, looked over my sketches with a puzzled expression. He told me the designs looked a bit like Hu-style stools, but different. He said they looked simple enough to build within a few hours, then asked how many I needed. I didn't just want 1 or 2. I wanted a complete set. I decided to stay and supervise the work myself. I pointed at the drawings, explaining exactly what I wanted. I needed 1 square table, 1 large lounge chair, a massive round dining table, and 20 matching chairs. I told Zhang Wang to put as many craftsmen on the job as possible. I was in a hurry. Zhang Wang was very cooperative. As the manager of the private manufacturing department, he didn't have much else to do, and he clearly saw this as a chance to get on my good side. Within minutes, a dozen craftsmen were huddled together, starting on the first chair. The first few attempts were rough. They wasted quite a bit of wood trying to get the angles right, but I stayed firm. I wanted every chair to be identical, the same height, the same width, and the same curve for the backrest. Once they finally produced one that met my standards, I told them to make 19 more just like it. While they handled the chairs, I worked with the remaining craftsmen on the tables. The small desk was custom-made for my height, intended for my private quarters. The large round table was for the side hall where we ate, and the square table and tea stands were for the front hall. By the time the sun began to set, the project was finally finished. I told the workers to sand everything down until it was smooth as silk. I gave them one warning. If the emperor sat here and got a splinter, things would go very badly for them. That did the trick. They practically pressed their faces against the wood, polishing every inch with obsessive care. I couldn't help but smile. It was true what they said. When the boss moves his lips, the workers run their legs off. Once the furniture was ready, I had Zhang Wang call for men to carry it all back to Dodgy Palace. It was dinner time, so the palace paths were mostly empty. A few servants saw us passing, but they quickly looked away. In this palace, curiosity was a death sentence, and they knew better than to ask what the prince was hauling through the gates. When we reached the palace, I had the eunuchs set everything down in the courtyard. I called for my maid, Dong Mei, to bring out 2 jars of coins. I handed them to Zhang Wang. I told him it had been a long day and thanked him for the hard work, asking him to split the money among the men. Zhang Wang looked shocked. He tried to refuse, waving his hands and saying it was just their duty to serve. I shook my head and pressed the money into his grip. I told him I knew life in the manufacturing department wasn't easy and that they'd missed their dinner because of me. 2 jars of coins was no small sum. Once split, each man would get a few hundred won, about half a month's salary for them. These men weren't high-ranking officials. They were just craftsmen who rarely saw tips or bonuses unless it was a major holiday. Zhang Wang looked genuinely moved. In a palace where every high-ranking servant looked down on them, my gesture meant the world. He bowed deeply, and his men followed suit, promising to help me whenever I had a new request. Once they left, I turned to my servant, Little Stone, with a grin. It was time to decorate. We moved the small desk into my bedroom, placing it right in front of my bookshelves. Then, we moved the round table into the side hall for dining, surrounding it with tin chairs. It was a simple design for now, but I already had plans for a rotating lazy Susan in the future. I didn't know how to build one myself, but I knew the ancient craftsmen were brilliant. If I gave them the concept, they'd figure out the mechanics. Finally, we tackled the front hall, where my mother, Consort Wei, received guests. I cleared out the old floor mats and replaced them with my new setup. I put the square table in the center of the head of the room, flanked by 2 grand chairs. Along the sides, I arranged the smaller tea tables and chairs in 2 neat rows. It looked exactly like a traditional reception hall from the movies back home. I could already imagine myself sitting in the high chair, shouting for someone to bring me tea. It felt powerful. It felt right. Meanwhile, across the palace in the Liangyi Hall, my father, Li Shimin, was not having such a relaxing evening. He was hunched over a pile of reports from across the empire. There were reports of natural disasters, rebellions in Taozhou, and constant friction from the powerful noble families who opposed his every move. He looked exhausted. His head eunuch, Wang De, softly reminded him that it was time to eat. My father just sighed, admitting he wasn't hungry. He asked Wang De why being a good emperor had to be so difficult. Wang De tried to offer some platitudes about the emperor's hard work, but my father just waved him off. He said he'd heard those same lines for a decade, and they were getting stale. Then, his mind shifted back to me. He asked Wang De if he had finished investigating my background. Wang De bowed. He reported that I had been a quiet student at the Imperial Academy, known for being smart, but very introverted. He said I never went out to cause trouble with the other noble kids, and spent all my time reading strange, miscellaneous books. Is that all? My father asked. What about that medical technique? The imperial physicians are still baffled. A person stops breathing for 15 minutes, and he brings them back without needles or medicine. Some call it a miracle. Others are calling it witchcraft. Wangda shook his head. He told my father that according to the servants at Daji Palace, I spent every waking moment behind closed doors, buried in my books. Wangda continued his report, explaining that Consort Wei had sent a vast collection of books into the palace for me. These weren't standard classics. They were miscellaneous, covering every strange topic imaginable. My father nodded, knowing today's miracle at the pond would be the talk of the town. He told Wang to keep a close eye on the rumors. He didn't want anyone with bad intentions twisting the story. Wangdo assured him that he'd already leaked positive versions of the event throughout Chang'an. If any nasty rumors started, the guards were ready to track down the source and make arrests. Good, my father said. But rumors are just a temporary fix. Let's walk. I've actually worked up an appetite. Wangda asked if he wanted to visit the Lijing Palace, where the Empress lived. My father thought for a moment. The Daji Palace, where I lived with my mother, was right next door. Not the Lijing Palace, he decided. Let's go to the Daji Palace. Back at my place, I was busy directing the servants. We were moving furniture around the front hall. Shen'er, what are you doing? My mother's voice rang out. I looked up to see Consort Wei walking in. I heard you had the traditional mats removed. Mother, look, I said, pointing excitedly. Good stuff. From now on, we don't have to kneel. Your legs won't have to ache anymore. My mother was tall. I'd read historical records saying she was over 6 feet, but seeing her in person, she felt even taller. Her legs were so long that sitting cross-legged on the floor was genuinely painful for her. She looked around the room. All the low tables were gone. In their place were things that looked like foreign stools, but more refined. I pulled her over to a large chair I had placed in the center. Try it out. She sat down, gripped the armrests, and leaned back. A look of surprise crossed her face. Oh, this is actually very comfortable. If it feels too cold, I'll have the servants make a soft cushion for it, I added. She looked at me, curious. Where did you learn to make these? I saw them in an old book, I lied. It was my go-to excuse. I was tired of my legs falling asleep while kneeling, so I had the craftsman build them. My son is clever, she praised. Go wash up now. It's almost time for dinner. Just then, a eunuch hurried in and bowed. Consort Wei, the emperor is on his way. Please prepare to receive him. I froze. What was Li Shimin doing here? Was he personally delivering my reward? If the emperor himself was bringing my prize, that was a huge deal. Mother, is father coming to give me my reward? I asked. She gave me a side-eye. Do you really think you have enough face for the emperor to hand-deliver a gift? The reward was delivered while you were out. Fair point, I muttered. I wasn't that special yet. Besides, the reward was only 50 strings of cash. It wasn't worth a royal trip. When I first heard 50,000 gold, I thought I was rich. Then my maid, Lan Yuer, explained that in this era, gold often just meant copper coins. It was a letdown. Stop daydreaming and go get ready, my mother urged. We lined up at the gate. A moment later, a swarm of guards entered to sweep the area. Then, my father appeared. We all bowed low. Rise, he said. He looked at my mother. Consort Wei, I'll be dining with you today. It is an honor, Your Majesty, she replied. He led the way inside, followed by a trail of servants carrying food boxes. Usually, the emperor's meals came from a special kitchen, while the concubines had their own. He stepped into the side hall and stopped dead. My mother gasped too. The room was empty of the usual floor mats and low tables. In the center stood a large, round dining table surrounded by high chairs. What is this? My father asked. He could guess their purpose, but he'd never seen anything like them. It's a table, father, I said, stepping forward. And those are chairs. They're for eating. How curious, he said. He signaled to Wangda. Set the food. The servants laid out the dishes. Since we only had one table now instead of separate ones for each person, all the food was placed together in the middle. I pulled out the chair at the head of the table for my father. He sat down and leaned back. These chairs didn't have armrests, making it easier to move while eating. This is much better than kneeling, he admitted. Sit. Let's eat together. My mother sat on his left, and I sat on his right. I waited for him to take the first bite before I dug in. I was starving. But before I could get a second mouthful, he spoke. Shen'er, where did these come from? I had them made at the palace workshop, I said. I mean, where did you get the idea? I saw it in an old book, father, My mother's legs have been hurting lately from kneeling so much. I wanted to make something so she wouldn't have to suffer. You are a filial son, he said, sounding impressed. I grabbed a clean pair of chopsticks and used them to serve a piece of meat onto his plate. Father, you should eat more. Coming from the modern world, I love the feeling of a family eating together. In this era, everyone usually ate at their own separate little tables. It felt cold. This felt like home. My father stared at the meat on his plate. He looked stunned. He was the emperor. No one ever just shared a table with him, let alone served him food like this. It was a strange, warm feeling. Wangda stepped forward to intervene. According to palace rules, the emperor shouldn't eat food touched by others' utensils for safety reasons. But my father waved him off. He didn't believe his own wife and son would poison him. My mother followed my lead, using the serving chopsticks to give him more food. We sat there, laughing and eating like a normal family. For a moment, he wasn't the great emperor of the Tang dynasty, and I wasn't just a spare prince. We were just a father and son. After dinner, we moved to the front hall. I had the servants bring out tea while my father and mother chatted comfortably in their new chairs. As we sat there, Li Shimin leaned back and started asking about my studies at the Guozijian. He wanted to know exactly what I was learning and how I was progressing. He even pressed me for my own personal insights on the classical texts. I kept my answers standard and balanced. I wasn't being overly humble, but I wasn't being arrogant either. I just spoke to him like a person. I could tell he was observing me. He seemed struck by my composure. Most of my brothers were incredibly stiff whenever they were in his presence. They called it being respectful, but in reality, they were just terrified. My father didn't seem to understand why they were so afraid of him. This was the Jingguan era, and life in the palace was actually quite harmonious compared to other times. There was an old saying that even a fierce tiger doesn't eat its cubs. As long as his sons didn't try to kill him or their brothers in a grab for the throne, they were safe. Even if I went out and committed a serious crime like arson or murder, he wouldn't take my life. At worst, he would give me a harsh lecture and exile me to my fief early. That was the reality of being royalty in this age. Nobles held massive privileges. If a high-ranking noble committed a crime, a local official didn't even have the authority to put them on trial. They had to send the person and the evidence straight to the capital. From there, the emperor would convene a group of elites for what they called the 8 deliberations. It was basically a private meeting where the powerful decided whether or not one of their own should actually face punishment. My father looked at me, his expression thoughtful. He seemed to appreciate that I wasn't trembling in my seat like the others. He cleared his throat and began to speak again, his voice echoing in the quiet hall.